The origins of boxing can be traced back to ancient civilizations, where the sport evolved from rudimentary forms of hand-to-hand combat. Here's a detailed explanation that you might find in a comprehensive YouTube video on the subject. Early beginnings. Ancient Sumer, 3rd millennium BCE. The earliest known depictions of boxing come from Sumerian reliefs found in Iraq, dating back to the 3rd millennium BCE. These carvings show two men in a stance that suggests early forms of boxing or wrestling. Ancient Egypt, 2nd millennium BCE. Egyptian hieroglyphics and art from around 1350 BCE depict boxing matches, often with spectators. The matches were sometimes part of military training, indicating an organized approach to the sport. Ancient Greece. Minoan civilization, late Bronze Age. Art from the Minoan civilization, particularly frescoes from the island of Crete, shows young men boxing, suggesting the sport was known in the Aegean region. Olympic Games, 7th century BCE. Boxing pugilism became a formal sport in ancient Greece and was included in the Olympic Games in 688 BCE. The Greeks used leather straps, hymantes, wrapped around their hands and forearms to protect themselves. The rules were minimal. The fight continued until one participant could no longer fight or conceded defeat. Philosophical and cultural significance. Boxing was not just a sport but also a part of the Greek educational system, gymnasium and military training. Philosophers like Plato and writers like Homer mentioned boxing in their works, illustrating its importance in Greek culture. Ancient Rome. Adoption and adaptation. The Romans adopted boxing from the Greeks but modified it for their own tastes. They introduced the caestus, a type of glove with metal studs or spikes, making the sport more brutal and dangerous. Gladiatorial games. Boxing became part of the gladiatorial games, often to the death, reflecting Rome's fascination with violent spectacles. Professional fighters, including slaves and prisoners, were trained specifically for these deadly contests. Ancient Asia. India. Evidence suggests that forms of boxing existed in ancient India, where martial arts like Vajramushti incorporated fist-fighting techniques. China. Chinese martial arts, which date back thousands of years, also included forms of hand-to-hand combat similar to boxing. Styles like Shuijiao, Chinese wrestling, and early forms of Kung Fu emphasized striking and grappling. Cultural and social impact. Rituals and festivals. In many ancient cultures, boxing matches were part of religious rituals and festivals, symbolizing strength and endurance. Training and techniques. Training methods varied across civilizations but often included rigorous physical conditioning and technique refinement. Boxing was used to develop warriors' combat skills, making it a crucial part of military training. Decline and transformation. Christian influence. With the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire, the perception of violent sports changed, leading to the decline of gladiatorial games, including boxing. Medieval period. Boxing saw a decline during the medieval period but survived in various forms, often as a part of knightly training or folk traditions. Resurgence. Renaissance and beyond. Boxing experienced a revival during the Renaissance, leading to the development of modern boxing rules and the establishment of organized competitions. This long and rich history of boxing illustrates how the sport evolved from ancient forms of combat into a structured and widely practiced athletic discipline. Prehistoric times. Evidence of combat. Anthropologists believe that forms of combat involving fists existed as early as prehistoric times. Cave paintings from around 3000 BCE in areas such as Africa depict scenes that resemble early forms of boxing. Mesopotamia and Sumer, 3rd millennium BCE. Sumerian artifacts. The earliest clear evidence of boxing comes from Sumerian artifacts. Stone carvings and reliefs from the ancient city of Uruk show boxers with their fists wrapped. These representations suggest that boxing was a recognized form of combat and sport, perhaps used in military training or as a form of entertainment. Ancient Egypt, 2nd millennium BCE. Boxing scenes in tombs. Tomb paintings from Beni Hassan in Egypt, dating back to around 2000 BCE, depict various forms of combat sports, including boxing. These images often show boxers in pairs, sometimes surrounded by spectators, indicating an organized and possibly ceremonial aspect to the sport. Ancient Greece, 8th century BCE onward. Mycenaean and Minoan civilizations. Art from the Mycenaean civilization, including frescoes and pottery, shows young men engaging in boxing. The Minoans on Crete also have similar depictions, suggesting that boxing was known in the broader Aegean region. Olympic Games and rules. Boxing was formalized in the 23rd Olympiad in 688 BCE. Known as pugilism, it was one of the earliest sports to be included in these ancient games. Fighters, known as pygmachia, used leather thongs wrapped around their hands for protection and grip. The rules were sparse, there were no rounds, and the match continued until one fighter could no longer continue or admitted defeat. Prominent figures and legends. Ancient texts mention legendary boxers like Theogenes of Thasos, who reportedly won over 1,400 contests in various forms of combat sports, including boxing. Philosophical context. Boxing was considered a test of strength, skill, and endurance. It was also seen as a way to train for war, embodying the Greek ideals of physical fitness and courage. Ancient Rome, 1st century BCE to 5th century CE. Integration with gladiatorial games. The Romans adopted boxing from the Greeks, introducing more brutal practices. Fighters used caestus, leather gloves embedded with metal or bone, making the sport more dangerous. Boxing became a popular event in gladiatorial games, often to the death. These matches were public spectacles, illustrating the Roman appetite for blood sport. Famous boxers. Historical records mention gladiators who specialized in boxing, some of whom became renowned throughout the empire. These fighters were often slaves or prisoners trained in special schools called ludi. Ancient Asia. China. Chinese martial arts, dating back thousands of years, incorporated boxing-like techniques. Shuaiqiao, a form of Chinese wrestling, included punches and open hand strikes, indicating an early integration of grappling and striking. Cultural significance. Religious and ceremonial roles. In many ancient cultures, boxing was tied to religious ceremonies and festivals. For example, in ancient Greece, boxing was sometimes performed in honor of gods like Apollo. Training and military use. Boxing was not only a sport but also a critical part of military training. It helped soldiers develop hand-to-hand combat skills, endurance, and physical toughness.